Welcome to Personalist Manifestos. My name is Michael, and I'm the host of this ongoing conversation about theology for the contemplative revolution. What I'm about to share with you is an audio recording with visuals of a recent presentation I gave on creative processes in a world with artificial intelligence, or why and how God uses the work of artists. Normally, Personalist Manifestos features dialogues throughout, but this one is a little bit different. It starts with a presentation and ends with a Q&A dialogue. Because I only had one mic, and the mic was my phone, the audio quality isn't great and the questions are quiet. But I did what I could to boost the sound and clean it up so you can hear everything. At the end of the day, this presentation is delivered and this dialogue is engaged with Ellul's work on art and technology looming in the background. Ellul teaches artists to be attentive to the world around them and to be careful about the techniques and processes they do and don't engage to represent the world. So in a world with AI, where technologies are producing art, and I put that in scare quotes, we would do well to listen to Ellul. And so with that, here is a presentation and dialogue inspired by some of my learnings from Ellul and others in this fraught and wondrous terrain of art and technology.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I just want to start by saying I'm grateful to be here with all of you, and thanks to Anita and the Surrey Christian Writers Leadership Team for the invitation. The way that this came about was I was invited to preach at Renew Church, where Anita goes, and after that sermon, we were having coffee and snacks like people normally do after the church service, and she said, "Do you know anybody at Northwest who would be able to come and talk about AI and writing?" I said, "Yes." You're looking at him. I did my doctoral research on theology and technology, and the way that came about is my background in creativity. I was a worship arts pastor before I got into academic ministry, and before that, I wanted to be a lot of different things, but the two that really stuck with me when I was thinking about what I would study for my undergrad was I wanted to be a musician, an actor, and or a writer. Yeah. So I'm a theologian. I stumbled my way into theology. Most of my degrees reflect that. That's what I do. But my undergraduate was in English literature and communications. So for quite some time, I actually dreamed, and in fact, I still dream about being a real writer, the kind who not only writes essays and the occasional book about theology that approximately 25 people read, but also writes stories, real fictional stories that more than 25 people read. One can dream, right? But what about those dreams? Dreams, I assume some or maybe even all of you have here today. Have recent developments in artificial intelligence made those dreams obsolete or made them into nightmares? So there is a lot of wonder and speculation and fear about technologies like AI. And I'm going to actually take a counterintuitive approach to questions around AI. Because as I was researching technology, I realized after a period of time that anytime a new technology sort of shows up, it can really draw our attention and it can preoccupy us and it can create a sense of enchantment, fear, what have you. And it can sort of keep you focused on one tree in the forest. But what happens when we step back and look at the forest? What we discover actually is that the questions being provoked by these new technologies, when you really start to sort of think deeper, the questions provoked by them actually aren't that new. They've just been resurfaced in a new way, or we're caused to revisit those questions that maybe we forgot about or we took for granted, or maybe we ask them in a new way. And that's what I want to do here. I want to talk about those dreams, and I want to talk about those developments and how it may change those dreams or threaten them. So those are the kinds of questions I want to explore. And I'll distill that down into a less rhetorical type of question. So it's a very, very direct one, but I think it'll be helpful. what is the point of being creative in general, and what's the point of writing in particular in a world where technologies are starting to create and to write for us? So I put the words create and write in scare quotes to draw attention to the fact that there are some people who are uncomfortable with those verbs being used to describe what's happening when technologies are prompted by people to work with words, to produce images, to generate sounds, and perform similar functions in a nearly, if not totally, automated way. So for reasons that will become quite clear quite soon, I'm one of those people who's uncomfortable with using those terms to describe what these technologies are doing, because I'm concerned that individual and collective outsourcing of the verbs create and write to technologies will, over time, result in further and damaging practical outsourcings of vital human actions to technologies. But for the sake of time and discussion, let's just say the following. However much anybody in this room, myself included, are discomfited by the idea that technologies actually create and write for us, there are a good number of people in the world today who, like Marshall McLuhan and Andy Warhol, believe that art is whatever you can get away with. And they're living, and they're working, and they're creating AI technologies accordingly. So to such people, what could I say, or what could we say to convince them that art is more than getting away with something? Whether that something is money, fame, attention, affirmation, a degree, a job, and so on. And let me tell you, as a professor who marks a lot of essays, there are a lot of students who are now using ChatGPT to write their essays, and at this point it's fairly easy to catch because it reads like a Wikipedia or encyclopedia entry, and there's scanning software to detect it, but it's happening. And it's not just undergraduate students, it's master's students and it's doctor of ministry students too, right? So it's everywhere, folks, okay? So what do I say to people? Why would I tell them, you really need to put in the time and effort to write this essay? And if the answer as a teacher is, because that's just what you do when you go to school, not good enough. So this is where I realized, okay, maybe the reason why students are using these technologies to sort of phone it in writing their work is because somewhere along the line, teachers forgot to tell them why we would bother sitting down to read and to write an essay in the first place, right? So what I say is, yeah, it's happening, but maybe this is an opportunity for us to rediscover and re-communicate why you would spend the time writing an essay, why you would spend the time reading what other people think before you start telling people what you think. Okay, so to return to that original question, how can we describe the point of being creative in general and writing in particular in a world where technologies are starting to create and write for us? So my preliminary answer to these questions, which I'll explore with all of you, and I want to have a conversation with all of you, your questions, your comments, because I feel like dialogue is really where the magic happens. But the question is my preliminary answer to this question is, the point of being creative in general and writing in particular is to discover we are not alone in the world, that there is in fact a world out there, and that in this world there are other people, and even a present, active, and loving God who experience what we experience and long for what we long for. But before we get too sparkly-eyed and romantic about the beauty on the other side of these discoveries, we also need to be honest about the risks that need to be taken when making a move towards this beauty. Because as we learned from Franz Kafka, this is one of my favorite definitions of art and prayer. Prayer and art are passionate acts of will. One wants to transcend and enhance the will's normal possibilities. Art, like prayer, is a hand outstretched in the darkness, seeking for some touch of grace, which will transform it into a hand that bestows gifts. Prayer means casting oneself into the miraculous rainbow that stretches between becoming and dying, to be utterly consumed in it, in order to bring its infinite radiance to bed in the frail little cradle of one's own existence. So what I've learned from Kafka and the artists we'll be meeting with in this presentation, and what I've learned from my own creative work and other creative people I have worked with, and most importantly, what I've learned from God in and beyond my time with Kafka, myself and other creative people, is that no real work of art and no genuine act of prayer can come into being if any of us chooses to outsource to technologies the risks inherent to creative processes and passionate acts of will. Each of us has to be willing to take the risk ourselves, with other people, and for other people, with God and for God, if we want to experience even just a little bit, or maybe even a lot, of what Kafka describes to us here. And so with all of that, the next part of my presentation conducts a case study to concretize what I've just put forward theoretically to you. And after that, I'll conclude with some practical reflections to help us return to our creative processes and passionate acts of will with renewed senses of what we're doing, why we're doing it, and how we're doing it. When we engage in creative processes and passionate acts of will, we hope will become a work of art and/or an articulation of prayer. And this case study will explain why the stylized title is Love Possum, I promise you, okay? So, getting right to the beginning. I'm going to start by showing you an image of a manuscript, and I want to see if any of you recognize what it is from before I tell you the story behind it, okay? Are we ready? Here it is. So the text is very small, but the title is He Do the Police in Different Voices, Part 1, The Burial of the Dead. So I'll give you a hint. It was formerly at least the beginning to a now famous poem. But as you can see, someone edited the manuscript and cut out all of this content, which resulted in this becoming the beginning to the now famous poem. So this is the actual beginning after these edits were made. Does anybody recognize what this is? First line, April is the cruelest month. Breeding. Wasteland. That's right. It's the start to T.S. Eliot's Nobel Prize in Literature winning poem, The Wasteland, which, of course, won that prize for good reason. It's a powerful poem. But here's the thing I learned about these edits that blew me away when I first heard about who was responsible for these edits. It was not T.S. Eliot editing his own work. It was Ezra Pound. Eliot's friend who suggested these and many other edits, including the removal of what Eliot originally intended as the poem's beginning, 54 stanzas. And here's the thing, they were the right edits. If you've heard The Wasteland, you do not forget the opening line, April is the cruelest month. Pound suggesting Eliot make April as the cruelest month the opening line to The Wasteland was like a baseball coach telling a person at bat, keep your eyes on the laces of the ball when the pitcher is starting to throw. Adjust your left foot in such and such a way here. Tilt your right shoulder there. Hold the bat like so in this way, not that way, and then, wham, home run. In fact, Eliot himself said that the following about Pound's imprints on the poem that won Eliot, not Pound's, a Nobel Prize in Literature. Quote, the poem in the form in which it currently appears owes more to Pound's surgery than anyone can realize. For instance, Pound cut out a lot of dead matter. I think that the poem as originally written was about twice the length. It contains some stanzas in imitation of Alexander Pope, and Ezra said to me, Pope's done that so well that you better not try to compete with them, which was sound advice. And there was also a long passage about a shipwreck, which I think was inspired by the Ulysses canto in Dante's Inferno. At any rate, he reduced it in length, while the fate of the manuscript or typescript with Pound's blue pencilings on it is one of the permanent, so far as I know, minor mysteries of literature. So what I've learned from Kafka and the artists here is that We need other people. And yet, despite Pound's involvement in T.S. Eliot's work, which T.S. Eliot publicly acknowledged, Pound sent a message to T.S. Eliot in July 1959, which says this: "Dear T.S. Eliot, forgive us our trespasses. Even you will forgive me when you realize the extent of my failure. Yours, Ezra." On August 5th, T.S. Eliot replies, "I'm distressed and alarmed by your laconic note on the 31st of July. What on earth is the failure you're talking about? And I don't like the insinuation that I have an unforgiving nature. Please reply quickly." Further anguished pages arrive from Pound, impossible to print except in facsimile, but including such phrases as, "I'm trying to repudiate 30 years of injustice to you from time of Ash Wednesday, you doing real criticism and me playing a tin penny whistle, and 30 years of impertinence from me." Pound's daughter, Mary de Rachowitz, also wrote on 23rd October, wondering whether T.S. Eliot might visit, and reported, "Pound is so overwhelmed by fragments that he does not even believe in his poetry anymore, and that's the worst part of it all." So T.S. Eliot sent a cable from the U.S. on the 30th of October. "2 letters received. I never forget my own great debt to you, to whom all living poets are indebted. Stop. Your criticism has always been immensely helpful. Stop. Your own achievement epoch-making. Stop. Now just going west, but will write as soon as possible. Love, Possum." Then a letter on 11th November. "Damn it, you're still the biggest man in the poetry world, and you've had the greatest influence on poetry of anyone in this century." So the friendship of Eliot and Pound, of which creative processes were a significant part, involves significant risks, which yield significant gifts and transformation. When Eliot needed help refining his poem to make the poem it needed to be, Pound was there. And when Pound needed a word of encouragement when he felt like a failure and could not believe in the value of his own work, Possum, which was Pound's nickname for Eliot, was there to offer words of encouragement. And through that friendship and the risks both took to make it a creative friendship, both discovered that they weren't alone in the world. Both received the gift of beauty and transformation, and both gifted the world with similar gifts and transformation. And so in these unique and interesting and profound ways, Possum and Pound ways, art and prayer can become, just as Kafka said, this hand outstretched in the darkness, seeking for some touch of grace which will transform it into a hand that bestows gifts. But will the increasing outsourcing of creative processes to AI move us closer to or further away from these kinds of friendships, these kinds of hope and transformation? At this point, and for the foreseeable future, it seems to me that the answer is further away. Now, I grant that it may be theoretically, if not actually possible for AI technologies to perform editing functions that produce similar results to those performed by the kind of relationship Pound and Eliot had, and what Pound did for Eliot's poem. But even if it's possible that ChatGPT could edit our work like this, would our relationships with AI technologies come close to the kind of friendship Pound and Eliot had? One in which Eliot trusted Pound enough to take the risk to share his work with his friend, thereby putting 54 stanzas plus more on the proverbial editorial butcher's block. One in which Pound trusted Eliot enough to take the risk to write letters disclosing despair about not only the value of his work, but the value of himself. And even if our relationships with AI technologies could come close to these kinds of relationships, would we want them to? And what would happen to our human relationships if they could reach this point? And we wanted them to. Could they come close to these kinds of relationships? So it's about more than the end product. It's about who we interact with along the way and what happens when we interact with them. And now we're asking what we interact with along the way. But really, can creative work really do this? Can art really do this? And if so, how? Well, I think I'm preaching to the choir here. That part of the reason why you do the work that you do is not just because it's personally fulfilling, but it brings you into community with other people. And as you may have discovered along the way in the maturation process of an artist, is if you want your work to be excellent, you can't do it alone. You have to take the risk to give it to other people, and hopefully you have those other people that you can give it to, right? So how do we do this? Well, it's not creative processes for creative processes' sake. It's creative processes for God, neighbor, and the world's sake. But some may ask, aren't there better, more important things we should be spending our time, energy, and money doing right now? How we answer this two-part question depends on our view of creativity. Highbrow creativity, lowbrow creativity, middlebrow creativity, or creativity that keeps us going when we don't feel like we can keep going anymore, in a world that seems to make us feel that way quite often. Creativity that when we make it and share it changes something in us and maybe just maybe changes something in other people. Creative that becomes a gift we give to a friend who opens it, inspects it, plays with it, is shaped by it, and gives it back so we can give it to others so that they can do the same and give it to others. And the kind of creativity that Madeleine L'Engle describes in the following stories she tells about stories in her wonderful book, Walking on Water. She writes, I recall Helen Mullen, a librarian from Philadelphia, who had us all in laughter or tears as she demonstrated her art of storytelling. One day, she told us about visiting the pediatric ward of hospitals and telling stories to the children, many of whom were in severe pain. But while the children were listening to the stories, they did not feel the pain. And then I remembered my elder granddaughter's 9th summer, most of which she spent on the pediatric floor of a city hospital after she had been hit by a truck on her way home from swimming. She could not be given any painkillers because of the head injury, and she was in great pain. And as she returned to full consciousness, she said to her parents and grandparents, I love you, and then read to me. So we read to her, hour on hour. When our voices would tire, we would slow down, and we would immediately hear, keep on editing, and so we kept on. Story was, it seems, a more effective painkiller than any chemical medication. So here, as plainly as I can put it, is my thinking on this. I think God gives us stories and tells us to make and tell stories because stories can be more effective than painkillers and any chemical medication. Because stories can be prayers like art and like prayer, all of which are hands outstretched in the darkness, seeking for some touch of grace which will transform it into a hand that bestows gifts. And this all means the risk of casting oneself into the miraculous rainbow that stretches between becoming and dying, to be utterly consumed by it, in order to bring its infinite radiance to bed in the frail little cradle of one's own existence. And if this is the case, what more can be said? What more can be done? If we believe creativity in general and writing in particular are this vital, then what should we do and say to block the flood of technologies that if we let them, will steal these vital things from us? I would love to hear your perspectives on this. But before that, I'd like to read from Habakkuk 2, verses 2 to 4, to propose at least one remedy to the kinds of outsourcings to technology ailing us today. There we see Habakkuk receive a compelling vision and command from God within the context of a precarious time, place, and set of circumstances. Then the Lord answered Habakkuk and said, write the vision, make it plain on tablets so that a runner may read it. For there is still a vision for the appointed time. It speaks of the end and does not lie. If it seems to tarry, wait for it. It will surely come, it will not delay. Look at the proud. Their spirit is not right in them, but the righteous live by their faith. So, write the vision. Make it plain on tablets so that a runner, a friend like Ezra Pound, may read it. And then who knows? If what I'm proposing is true, then the question becomes how. Now that we've established why, the point of creativity in a world where technologies are creating and writing for us, then how should we go about creating without losing the vitality of creativity? Or what methods and tools should we use and not use to make art in the ways I'm talking about here? I can put forward a lot of ideas, but two primary, different, and related ones come to mind as I close down here. First, to paraphrase Miles Davis, it's what you leave out that matters most. Not just in the final product of whatever you're creating, but all along the way of making art, you have to be discerning what to put in, what to remove, and what to keep in. And we saw this at play in the wasteland example. Cutting over 50 stanzas needed to happen. And just because they were cut in the end, it does not mean the writing of the stanzas was not important, or even that those stanzas did not make it into the final piece. It only means that a vital part of getting to the final version becomes less evident to the people unaware of the process engaged to get there. I think that's the value of sprints. You may not actually use it in the final product, whatever that is, but it was the bridge that got you to it. And you just have to be willing to walk across that bridge. And, we can't kill this, right? It's not going to make it in the final product. Oh, it is. It just operates in the background. So it's what you leave out. The second and different but related part to the how question is as follows. However the vision for the start, middle, and end comes to you, in that critical moment and all the critical moments that grow out of that one critical moment when you catch the vision for not only that what, but also the who, where, why, when, and how. It's about being faithful to that original vision and allowing that vision to take you on a journey toward the final product with the beginning, middle, and end of that journey all being important to that process. And this is the risk with AI technologies. They take the journey for us and very, very quickly. But the transformation that occurs in you as you take the longer route is critical to the process. I mean, this is it. You can't shortcut personal transformation. I mean, you can pretend that you've experienced it, but sooner or later it catches up with you. So a technology or technologies may help us along the way, but we need to watch out whenever a technology or technologies start to replace the relationship we have with the idea, with our friends, with God and the world. Because if that happens, we're cooked, literally and metaphorically speaking. And so I'll end here with the wisdom of David Lynch on these matters, who said the following in an interview. It comes on like a TV in your mind. People, we don't do anything without an idea. So ideas are beautiful gifts. Desiring an idea is like a bait on a hook. And you can pull them in and you can catch an idea that you love, that's beautiful. That's a beautiful day. And you write that idea down so you don't forget it. And that idea you caught might just be a fragment of the whole, whatever it is you're working with. But now you have even more bait. Thinking about that small fragment, that little fish will bring in more. And they'll come in a way and they'll hook on. And more come in, and pretty soon you might have a script or a chair or a painting or an idea for a painting. So, we can't outsource any of this to technology. Instead, we have to try to receive all of this from God, from friends, and from the world. And then try and give all of this back to God, to our friends, and to the world. And the processes we engage in may not result in success, money, fame, attention, affirmation, a degree, or a job. And the risk we take may not result in us getting away with the final product being called a real work of art or a truly genuine prayer. But if the creative process and passionate act of will draws you closer to God and other people, if the process and will helps you discover you're less alone in the world than you and all of us sometimes feel, if you cast yourself into the miraculous rainbow that stretches between becoming and dying to be utterly consumed in it, to bring its infinite radiance to bed in the frail little cradle of our own existence, and if there is a friend or even some friends there with you as you do the casting, then that from an eternal and here and now perspective was and is the point to you engaging the creative process and committing to a passionate act of will in the first place. Thank you. So we have until noon, correct? Great. So now I'd love your thoughts, questions. They don't have to be full-baked. They can be half-baked. This is my favorite part when we get to talk.
So to me, another reason for the creative act and creative development is because I think it's preparing us for our responsibilities in eternity. You know, like God has, remember those stories about God entrusting people with their talents and stuff?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's all in the context of ruling and reigning with Him in eternity.
Right.
So I think that part of what we do on this earth is disposing or taking care of our responsibility to become what we're supposed to become in our life after death.
Right, and the work that we do is a critical role of that becoming. Sure. Yeah, and makes me think about in Revelation where it talks about all the tribes and nations going into the eternal city, and what do they bring? They bring their works, they bring their worship. And, here's an interesting prompt, is thinking about, what am I going to bring in? And this gets into a bit of the vision of success thing, is what do we envision when we envision the works that we bring in? What I love about God is that sometimes those works could be big, an epic poem, or I don't know, something that sort of meets the mark according to worldly standards, and yet some of the smallest things actually turn out to be the biggest thing in God's kingdom.
I think it's faithfulness.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I love the parable of the mustard seed when it feels like I'm not accomplishing much, because it's just start with something small and see what it grows into. Yeah, I think that's right. It's not just about the here and now. It's about reverberates out into eternity for sure.
Michael, what would your hero Shack, Ellul, think about AI created glow-in-the-dark creatures?
What would my I think about?
Ellul has been a big person. How would he assess some of this AI creation? You alluded to being able to create new species that glow in the dark. What would his take on that be?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So just for those who aren't aware, one of the thinkers that I researched for my doctorate, his name is Jacques Ellul. I don't know if that name rings a bell with anybody, but if it does, that's awesome. He was a French sociologist and theologian who wrote quite a lot after the Second World War. He's most known for his book, Technological Society. And so he, coming out of being in France during the Second World War, was very concerned about the pace of technological development in the late modern world, just given the devastation that he saw, being in France during the Second World War. So he and some others in continental Europe became known for being technological pessimists. And what's really interesting about Ellul's work is as early as 1947, when he started working on Technological Society, he was already writing about cybernetics and the prospect of thinking machines. So all throughout his publications, right up until he died in 94, he was writing about the possibility of thinking machines. And in his later works, he actually talks about artificial intelligence. And he was quite concerned about it. But he was also skeptical about whether or not machines would actually be able to think artificially, because he said he's not convinced that machines will be able to think symbolically. They can imitate symbolic thinking, but the sort of free association that happens in the human mind when we think about symbols, sure, a computer can sort of perform poetry, but can it really? He also talks about the embodiedness, right? We're not just brains. Our brains are connected to our bodies, and both are connected to our souls. And so there's something about our whole personhood that makes it seem unlikely, he would say, that AI could ever truly be created. That being said, he was still very concerned about the idea that we would be trying to do it, and what would happen when we started, at the very least, thinking that we can just let machines do poetry for us, right? Make art for us, or calculate who gets a mortgage or not, or calculate who's likely to reoffend as a criminal or not, or, hey, let's create glow-in-the-dark creatures, or edit the gene code. And he actually ends Technological Society with this chapter called A Look at the Year 2000. And he's got this really chilling line where he says, the dictatorship of the future will not be one of hobnail boots, it'll be one of test tubes. And that is what got him an endorsement from Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World. people asked Huxley, hey, so you wrote this story that everybody's reading, what books would you suggest that inspired you? And he said, what I was trying to do in fiction, Ellul did in sociology.
How do you spell his last name?
Ellul. Yeah. So in short form, very concerned. And so should all of us be. But the trouble is these days is the pace moves so fast. It's hard to keep up with all the developments. So we hear about things here and there, but do we really know the extent to which these things are progressing? And even if we do, can we stop them? And how do we regulate them? It's really concerning. So what do? It's the little works. We're back to the little works, right? Little acts of resistance that matter.
Do you see any purpose or any way that you should be involved with AI at all?
I tell people, like students, for example, treat it like a high-powered search engine.
Yeah.
So if you're like in the same way that we use Google or Bing or any other search engine, treat it as such. And just in the same way that hopefully you're analyzing whatever results you're getting for reliability from a Google search, you would be doing the same with ChatGPT. The trouble with that is I don't know if we've been doing that with Google or TikTok or Facebook or even mainstream and fringe news. So there's one way to look at this is to say AI is totally out of the blue, new. And the other way is to say, actually, this is just a development in the ongoing plot of giving ever more trust to machines to tell us what is true, good, and beautiful, as compared to doing the difficult, but I think important and like transformative work of as people figuring out how to do that together. But I say, I'm not going to say don't use it, but use it in the way that you would any search engine or Wikipedia search, right?
Because now when you search something on Google, the first answer you get is AI generated.
Yeah, it's already there for sure. Yeah.
Interesting. I had an author recently. I work in acquisitions for a publisher who came to me and in her discussion when I asked her about her book and she's describing it, she's full of passion. She specifically said to me, and I discovered using AI, and I'm bing, 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 right in my head, because AI is intelligence. It's not emotion. So if you're writing the way God intended us to write, you can tell when you read it because it will say the words, but the imparting of the emotion that we bring to what we write is not there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's honestly how I catch students, because like I said, it reads like a Wikipedia entry because it's good at telling you information based on its data that it's collected and reading, but there's no personal voice. Now, theoretically, you could probably, and maybe there even exists technologies now where it's like, well, it can scan some samples of your own writing and your social media behavior, and probably, through the way that it listens to you talking through your phone and your Amazon Alexa, it probably could get to the point where it's able to model your personal voice, but my goodness, that kind of freaks me out. But yes, at this point, it's not sophisticated enough to perform that emotional, personal voice, it performs labor for you, but that next level of depth in creative labor, it's not there.
You can tell the difference between a live voice.
Yes, for sure.
Because of the emotion.
Yeah.
Actually, again, I was talking on the radio last night, and wrote an article yesterday that came out about everybody's cheating to get through, the Ivy League schools. And he said you can actually administer some of your old papers, and you can actually now.
Yep.
But anyway, just getting back, like you mentioned earlier, tradition and the individual challenge. See, his idea is you absorb all the literature before, and then you add your individuality. So if you were to, take Dostoevsky and William Faulkner and put the two together, and GDP, and then create something new that would be like tradition and the individual talent, you'd be creating something new.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be literature that's different.
Mhm.
but it doesn't have the spirituality.
Yeah.
It can't.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is the conversation that I have with like colleagues and students of. This is what I was getting at with the get away with piece. If you're coming to school just because you want a degree to get a job, why wouldn't you use it? Because if that's the end goal, then it's going to determine your means and you're going to want to get there as fast as you can. But if you're at school to actually learn and grow, using it will take you away from that end. Yeah, it will. So you know, there are some people like, yeah, I just want a degree. I don't want to grow. I just want, and that will stunt your growth. And then long term, when you actually end up in a job, like I work with pastors, chaplains, therapists, and you know, theologians, right? What happens when you're actually required to care for people who are very wounded? Like you are actually shortcutting that very vital process of spiritual formation and personal formation, so that you've done the thinking to be able to actually give an account of whatever it is that you believe, or, you know, care for people in that way. But yeah, I mean, even in terms of the literature piece and tradition, like I bet if you put in all of Dostoevsky's works and threw in a little Faulkner and whatever, and, you know, give me a little bit, you know, give me something new based on this, you could do that. And maybe you even could have a work that you present on your own and get the attention. And but I think, what do you lose out when you just, maybe you gain some things, but you lose the transformation that it would take you to do all that work yourself, right? But some people would say, that's fine, I just want the money or the attention. And
That's both the one.
yeah.
I feel like we lose our humanness because the human condition is that we're flawed. And I think that's what makes our writing relatable sometimes, is that, you know, if you're reading someone's works and you see something that's slightly flawed, it's like we can relate to that. And I think that AI replaces that, because it's all about precision, and even though AI can be flawed because of like what it's been fed information that was incorrect, it still doesn't have that humanness that we all want to relate to.
Yeah.
Right? Like there may be hints of that, but I think we can tell. At
Yeah.
this point we can. We may not in the future, but.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's totally right. I mean, ask yourself, you know, I think music is a great example. Like when you think about some of the most enduring, timeless songs, is it the perfectly polished, produced types of stuff that we hear on the radio today that endure for decades beyond they're being written and recorded? I mean, I don't think that's always the case. Like, why do people still go see the Rolling Stones? It's not for their perfect, flawless, polished execution. It's to see Keith still doing what Keith does, which is playing behind and around the beat, which is what you learn from blues music, right? And actually, I work with students who are learning, like, just who they are and how they're going to preach, and I tell them to listen to blues music, because blues music is reduction to simple forms, engage with simple tradition, and in repeating that over and over and reducing your creative options, you have to learn how to discover your voice within that simplicity. And again, it's the humanness and the rawness and the imperfections of blues music that make it still worth listening to. So yeah, I totally agree. If you want something that's totally sterile and polished and, you know, going to work well on a 30-second TikTok video or a car commercial, why not? But if you want to move people, like some of these, like Motown, okay, like if you want to move people, it's actually about what you leave out, the reduction of the elements, and just the vulnerability in the creation and the performance that moves people. And again, I'm sure we could write an algorithm that could fake the vulnerability and perfection, but like, where's the fun in that? It's not fun doing that. It's fun actually being the actors in it and playing music with your friends, or giving a manuscript to your friend and seeing what they say. That makes this all fun and worth doing.
Yeah, I've heard like saying all art aspires to the state of music. And music is actually spirit. So it has a force behind it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not just, otherwise it's just noise. To an animal, it's just noise.
Mm-hmm.
But to us, it's resonating in a way that is actual spiritual
Yeah.
element. And a computer cannot do that.
Mm-hmm. And it may be able to channel the spirits enough based on its reading, but
Well, it's still you.
yeah,
It's still a spiritual force within you that's resonating,
Yeah.
not the computer.
yeah. But again, what do we lose when we outsource that? Is the question.
I would say that real creativity comes from God, and you cannot instill that in any machine, no matter how sophisticated that machine is. In German, there is a word called Verbotisfunke. It simply means the spark of God that God places into each and every one of us when He creates us. And that Verbotisfunke is totally missing in any machine, no matter how sophisticated that thing is. They can only imitate us. It's always an imitation. They can be very sophisticated, but it's the rawness of the emotions, the soul, that will always be missing. And I know, nowadays they talk about, oh yeah, we can do this and that and everything else, but I think that's just the arrogance of people today, the pride
Yeah.
of people today, that they think they can replace God in that sense, but we can't.
Yeah. And there's a really great novel about AI on that. It's called Frankenstein. And it's by Mary Shelley. I like that. When I read that in my undergrad, I was so struck by it and so freaked out. But when people ask, like, what's your favorite AI story? I'm like, Frankenstein. Like, if you watch out what you create, because you might inadvertently create a monster and terrify yourself and abandon it, which turns it into a monster more and more. The interesting presumption that's at play in a lot of the talk and research around this is what you're talking about, this spark, when the word for that is the singularity, right? Where we arrive at this point whereby we get that spark, we get that genuine intelligence, we get whatever it is that makes human. But one of the assumptions that's at play there is that quantity of information and processing power and technological innovation will at some point cross a threshold into qualitative. And I go back and forth on this, but I probably tend to agree with you that quantity will not necessarily result in quality. There's something qualitatively unique about humans, and talk about enduring questions, and I'll end here because we'll be having lunch in a moment.
We've got till 12:15 now.
Oh, we do?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay, then we can keep going. I mean, here's the thing. I have the gift of hyperfocus, so I can go as long on these things as you can, times 5. So if, keep throwing questions my way, because this...
Would the word Terminator mean anything to you?
Yeah. Yeah. We can talk about Terminator. When I talked about enduring questions being resurfaced by technology, the question, what does it mean to be human, has been resurfaced by it. And I think there's a whole host of assumptions in the discussions around AI that make assumptions about what it means to be human, or this desire to transcend what it means to be human that are quite problematic or limited. But here's the thing. I actually think that before AI showed up in the mainstream discourse, I think our visions of the human were quite limited. One of the areas that I do work in and teach in is in the area of disability. Disability theology. If you didn't know that that's a field of theology, now you know. But what the phenomenon of what most people call disability does is it actually it disrupts and or stress tests your vision of what it means to be human, whether you're a Christian or not. So if we talk about Imago Dei, right, that's usually the go-to when we talk about what it means to be human from a Christian perspective. And when we talk about the Imago Dei, the image of God, what do most people say the Imago Dei is?
Created in the image of God.
You're created in the image of God, but what does that mean? What does that mean about you if you're created in the image of God?
Mary holding baby Jesus.
Sorry?
Mary holding baby Jesus.
Okay. Well, sorry, what did you say?
You're also able to create.
You're also able to create. Okay, some other people said some things.
I said creativity as well.
So here's the question. What if you're born into the world and you don't have the ability to create? Does that mean that you are somehow less an image bearer, less human? So if the image of God is a capacity, what happens to humans who aren't born with that capacity? But if, like in Colossians, we say, Jesus is the perfect image of the invisible God, and every human is created as a version of that image, or like a copy, or a unique image of that original image, well, then that opens a whole host of territory to think about what it means to be human and be surprised about the way that the image of God works its way out in us, whoever we are, whatever capacities we have or not. So that's why I see it regularly that when you introduce the category of disability into all the things that we've grown up being taught about theology, it actually sort of upsets the apple cart a bit, because we just say, oh yeah, the image of God is, thinking or creativity or morality or conscience. And then all of a sudden you meet a person who doesn't seem to have those things. And then how do they fit into that category, right? So there's the broader world of our concepts of like humanness, but even within Christianity, we have some limits or shallow thinking on humanity. And maybe this is an opportunity for us to think more deeply about what humanness is and how that does distinguish us from machines. Yeah.
But in Christ, we become a new creation.
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, the old is gone and the new has come.
Mm-hmm.
So we're not born into God, we're created into God through the Holy Spirit.
Yeah. And this is another field of discussion, is what does the resurrected body look and sound like, and what can it do and what can't it do?
That's a good question.
What's that?
We keep finding out every day.
Yeah.
Now we're getting theologies.
Yeah. But those visions, or the way we answer those questions, inform how we deal with questions around not just who we are and where we're going, but the technologies, right? Because there's a lot of research done in the technological world, and pointing out that there is, despite the fact that it would claim to be kind of secular, scientific, right, focused on material stuff, not on spiritual stuff, the more you hear some of the sort of prime advocates for this, the more you start to hear language that sounds pretty religious. So the whole transhumanist movement is, in a way, this about transcending beyond where we are now to be able to defeat death, right? And once you start getting into those terms, you're starting to envision what looks like a very sort of promising religious type future, right? The technical term for it is eschatology, right? End time stuff, right? So envisioning a sort of heavenly type of being and heavenly type of earth that we can get there, not through God's, creative action, but through our own. So yeah, the way that this spiritual and religious language creeps back in the types of visions, it's all there. And you talk about Terminator, all these sci-fi movies, right? A lot of them are there as creative representations of not just what we're doing materially, but how this is affecting us spiritually.
I even think about the original Star Trek movie and how transcending, two coming together and transcending into this artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
Thinking being. Right?
Yeah, for sure. And Star Wars is very utopia.
Did I say Star Wars?
Or sorry, Star Trek is very much a utopia. But some people ask the question, and it's even within the Star Trek fan base and lore, it's how do we actually deal with this? Because it is how did they arrive at that utopia without it being authoritarian?
Yes.
Because it's this core group that decides what's good and bad, and then they travel around and insert themselves into the planet's problems, solve them, and then leave. You're like, how is this not technocratic authoritarianism? But, they've got explanations to sort it out.
There you go.
Yeah.
So would you see AI as collapsing in on itself at some point? And if so, how long do you think it will be as it continues to scrape all this data and some of the data isn't good?
Yeah.
And it comes up with more and more errors, and then people use it to write things that have those errors and so on until it just kind of
Yeah.
sits.
It's a great question. I mean, I think we're already in the mess on that front. But one of the very real risks with all of this is actually the amount of power that is needed in order to run these technologies, like the data centers, and how big they are, how hot they are, and how much energy they consume. There's real environmental effects, and there's been studies done where the amount of power consumed by like one chat GPT search or prompt is significantly greater than a Google search, and a Google search still consumes a lot of energy. And we humans keep, I say the universal we keep behaving like our planet won't run out of resources to support the demands that we're putting on it. And at some point, it will not have that anymore. And what do we do when we get there? But a lot of this is out of sight, out of mind, right? Because technology from the Silicon Valley presentations and ads make it seem like this very clean, sterile, thing. But the actual data centers are located in very sort of secluded places that tend to be cold, and the amount of security that guard them, the amount of human labor that goes into building them and running them, it's a massive operation. It's a massive supply chain. And not only does it hurt the planet, actually it hurts a lot of humans too. Typically in the developing world, the people who have to mine the materials to get what goes into all of this is a lot. So at some point, I don't know when, but if we keep going, there'll probably be like material collapse as well as, I don't know if you want to call it ideological collapse, but like ideological explosion that we're seeing right now, where a lot of lies are being told, and it's sowing a lot of division, and it's sowing a lot of animosity. And, those who identify Christian aren't immune from that. So, yeah.
I wrote a poem about AI. May I read it?
Sure.
I am a man. I am a woman. I am a child of the human condition. I breathe, see, smell, listen, taste, touch. I can feel without touching. I can see without looking. My sisters are here. My brothers are here. We do these senses together. I conclude you cannot do these things with us.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to come back to AI and students and so on. So my concern is that actually students no longer know how to do proper research. They don't go to original sources. So they usually end up with, on the reference page, it's something that somebody wrote about something that somebody wrote about something.
Mm-hmm.
And in all that thing, things become distorted. And we're kind of losing the real connection to the past and history and everything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, as a theologian, part of the work that I'm doing when teaching theology is sometimes I just address the question directly, but it's always there is, what's the point of reading theology, right? I happen to be a part of a tradition that says, well, we don't need all that weird theology stuff. We just need just the Bible for what it says, and we just read it and then we do it. And some of you are triggered right now. And of course, being a Protestant, like one of the beautiful things about the Reformation was the idea that the priesthood of all believers all got access to Scripture and were able to read it and engage with it. And yet, part of the wider vision of this priesthood of all believers, communion of saints, is that we read it together, and we write about it together, and we talk about it together. And even when we die, what we wrote about it is passed forward to other people who get to read it and enter into this conversation with people living and dead to collectively engage with each other on these scriptures that tell us about who God is, what God is up to, and what God desires for us. And so, yeah, part of my job is to say, why read theology? Well, reading a good theologian is helpful because a good theologian is a good reader of the Bible. So if you read them, they teach you how to be a good reader of the Bible. And so helping them, inviting them into that world. And what's really cool when you start to spend time in that world is like, oh man, those questions or experiences that I thought were totally new that nobody experienced, Augustine was writing about them in the 3rd century. We feel less alone. And it's so cool how God actually creates this ongoing conversation. Someone said tradition, right? Alistair McIntyre says that a living tradition is an extended argument over time, right? Hopefully a collegial argument or a friendly argument. How do we ourselves enter into that ongoing conversation and invite other people into it? Because it matters. It really does change lives. Just when I'm picking course texts, right, I'm obsessive about it because I really believe that one book, one chapter, or maybe even one sentence can change a life. I bet if we went around and said, I remember I read this book at the right time, and it just changed everything, I'm sure we'd all have stories about that. It names something that we knew all along, but we didn't have the word for it. Or it tells you that this exists and you didn't know, and you're like, but this has been in me for so long, and now I realize I'm not the only one. Like, that is why we go into that world. And how do we invite people into that world? And talk about it openly and not just assume that everybody's nerds like us and take for granted that you want to spend time there. So that's the challenge. That's the opportunity. Thank you for your time and engagement. I really appreciate it.